The Mad Alchemist, a chilling psychological horror story. In a small, quiet town, there was a young man who worked as an apothecary. He made potions and medicines to help the people in his town. He was very good at his job and loved working with herbs and plants, but there was something special about him that no one knew. He had a secret. Every day, a beautiful and mysterious woman came to his shop. She was different from anyone he had ever met. She knew so much about herbs and potions, more than anyone should know. The young apothecary was fascinated by her. He looked forward to her visits and found himself thinking about her all the time. The apothecary, a man of gentle demeanor and a heart as soft as his healing ointments, found himself increasingly drawn to the woman who frequented his shop. She was a quiet soul, her eyes often lost in contemplation, and her words few and far between, but her presence was a balm to his spirit. He would often find himself lingering near her, watching as she browsed the shelves, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns of the ceramic jars. The soft rustle of her skirts and the faint scent of lavender that seemed to follow her were like a soothing melody to his senses. He was happy just to be near her. He started to feel something more than just friendship for her. He was falling in love. A pall of dread hung over the quaint town of Willow Creek. The once vibrant streets were now hushed. The laughter of children replaced by the solemn tolling of church bells. A strange sickness had crept into the community, a malady that defied explanation. Victims fell ill with alarming rapidity, their symptoms as baffled as they were terrifying. Amidst this growing unease, Apothecary found himself grappling with a troubling realization. As he tended to the sick and dying, he noticed a peculiar pattern. Many of those who had succumbed to the mysterious illness had visited his shop in the days leading up to their demise. The thought sent a chill down his spine. Could there be a connection? He began to worry, but he didn't want to believe that the woman he loved could be involved. The more he thought about it, the more he tried to push away his fears. He wanted to keep his secret feelings safe, but deep down, he knew something wasn't right. The once vibrant town of Willow Creek was now shrouded in an eerie quiet. The once bustling streets were deserted. Save for the occasional figure hurrying past, their faces etched with fear. Strange, unexplained deaths had been plaguing the town for weeks, leaving residents gripped by a sense of dread. Every morning, they would wake to the news of another victim, their bodies found in bizarre and gruesome circumstances. Rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by fear and superstition. Some whispered of a vengeful spirit, others of a deadly contagion. No one knew the truth, and the uncertainty was driving the townspeople to the brink of madness. Into this atmosphere of fear and confusion stepped a man named Thomas Harper, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving the most perplexing cases. Harper had been brought to Willow Creek by a desperate plea from the town's mayor. As he stepped off the train, he was immediately struck by the palpable tension in the air. The town seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the next tragedy to unfold. Harper knew he had his work cut out for him, but he was determined to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. He began his investigation by visiting the local hospital, where he spoke with the doctors and nurses who had treated the victims. He then interviewed the families of the deceased, trying to piece together the events leading up to their untimely deaths. The investigator started asking questions. He went to the places where the sick people had been. Soon, he found out that many of them had visited the apothecary's shop. This made him curious, so he decided to watch the young apothecary closely. The apothecary noticed the investigator asking questions around town. He began to feel nervous. He didn't want anyone to think he was involved in the strange deaths. But he also didn't want to believe that the woman he loved could be the cause. The woman still came to his shop, and the apothecary still felt drawn to her. But now, there was a shadow of fear in his heart. He started to feel like someone was always watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. The investigator got closer and closer to finding out the truth. He started visiting the apothecary's shop, pretending to need medicine. The apothecary tried to act normal, but inside he was worried. He knew that if the investigator found out about the woman, everything would be ruined. The young apothecary was scared. The investigator was getting too close. Every day, the investigator came to the shop and asked more questions. The apothecary tried to stay calm, but it was hard. He didn't want the investigator to find out his secret. The woman still visited the shop. She seemed calm, like nothing was wrong, but the apothecary knew that if the investigator found out about her, she might be in danger. He wanted to protect her, so he tried to keep the investigator away from her. One day, the investigator asked the apothecary if he knew anything about the sick people. The apothecary said no, but he could see that the investigator didn't believe him. The apothecary started to feel trapped. He needed to find a way to keep the investigator from discovering the truth. The apothecary began to avoid the investigator. When the investigator came to the shop, the apothecary pretended to be busy. He tried to give short answers and not let the investigator stay too long. But the more he tried to avoid the investigator, the more suspicious he seemed. The investigator noticed that the apothecary was acting differently. This made him even more curious. He started to watch the apothecary more closely, trying to find out what he was hiding. The apothecary felt like he was in a game of cat and mouse. He wanted to keep his secret safe, but every move he made seemed to make things worse. The investigator knew something was wrong. He believed the young apothecary was hiding something. So he decided to set a trap. The investigator came up with a plan to catch the apothecary and find out the truth. One day, the investigator pretended to be sick. He came to the apothecary's shop, looking pale and weak. He asked the apothecary for medicine, saying he felt very ill. The apothecary was surprised and worried. He didn't know what to do, but he couldn't refuse to help. The apothecary made a special potion for the investigator. He hoped it would make the investigator feel better and stop asking questions. But the investigator was watching closely, looking for any clues that might reveal the apothecary's secret. While the apothecary was busy, the investigator secretly searched the shop. He looked at the bottles and herbs, trying to find something that could explain the strange deaths in town. The apothecary didn't notice because he was focused on making the potion. After the investigator got the potion, he thanked the apothecary and left the shop. But he didn't really leave. He stayed close by, watching to see what the apothecary would do next. The investigator hoped the apothecary would make a mistake, something that would prove he was involved in the deaths. The apothecary felt uneasy. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't know what. He tried to stay calm and act normal, but deep down he was scared. He didn't know that the investigator was setting a trap for him. The apothecary knew he was in danger. The investigator was getting too close, and the apothecary could feel the trap closing around him. He decided that he needed to do something before it was too late. The apothecary started to think about how he could stop the investigator. He tried to guess what the investigator would do next. The apothecary thought that if he could stay one step ahead, he might be able to protect his secret and the woman he loved. First, the apothecary cleaned his shop carefully. He got rid of anything that might make the investigator suspicious. He threw away old bottles and burned herbs that could be used to make poisons. He wanted to make sure there was nothing left that could link him to the strange deaths. Next, the apothecary tried to find out more about the investigator. He asked people in the town what they knew about him. The apothecary learned that the investigator was smart and had solved many cases before. This made the apothecary even more nervous, but he knew he had to stay strong. The apothecary decided to visit the woman he loved. He told her about his worries and asked for her advice. The woman listened quietly, then told the apothecary that he needed to be careful. She said that the investigator was dangerous, and they needed to be ready for anything. The apothecary took her words to heart. He began to plan his next move, trying to think like the investigator. But every time he came up with a plan, it seemed like the investigator was always one step ahead. The apothecary felt trapped, but he knew he couldn't give up. Just when the apothecary thought things couldn't get worse, something unexpected happened. A new person came to the town. This person was another apothecary from a town far away. He was older, with gray hair and a serious face. He came to the young apothecary's shop one evening. The apothecary, his heart pounding in his chest, had just finished restocking the shelves when he heard a creak at the door. His breath caught in his throat as a tall, gaunt figure stepped into the dim light. The stranger was an apothecary. His attire a stark contrast to the town's rustic garb. His face was etched with lines of age and experience, his eyes a piercing shade of gray. "A pleasure," the stranger began, his voice low and raspy. "I am called Aurelius. I've come from a town to the north." The young apothecary, taken aback, stammered out a greeting. "Welcome, Aurelius." Aurelius nodded, his gaze scanning the shop. "A quaint little establishment, though I must say your selection of herbs is quite limited." He felt a pang of embarrassment. He had been struggling to keep the shop afloat. I'm doing my best." "I understand," Aurelius replied, his tone softening, "but perhaps I can offer some assistance. I have a wealth of knowledge that might prove useful." The old apothecary introduced himself and said he was there to help with the strange deaths. He had heard about the troubles in the town and wanted to see if he could find out what was causing them. The young apothecary was surprised and a little scared. He didn't know why this man had come, but he felt that something was wrong. The old apothecary started asking questions, just like the investigator had done, but this time the questions were different. The old apothecary asked about the woman, the one the young apothecary loved. He seemed to know a lot about her, things that the young apothecary had never told anyone. The young apothecary began to feel uneasy. He wondered how the old apothecary knew so much. The old apothecary then revealed something shocking. The woman had been involved in similar strange deaths in other towns. She moved from place to place, leaving a trail of poison and death behind her. The young apothecary was stunned. He didn't want to believe it, but the old apothecary showed him proof. Stories from other towns with the same pattern of deaths. The young apothecary realized that the woman he loved might be more dangerous than he ever imagined. This new information changed everything. The young apothecary didn't know who to trust anymore. He felt trapped between the investigator, the old apothecary, and the woman he loved. The game had changed, and he didn't know what to do next. The young apothecary was caught in a terrible situation. He had to choose between saving himself or protecting the woman he loved. The old apothecary and the investigator were closing in, and the truth about the woman was too much to ignore. He knew he couldn't keep his secret safe any longer. One night, the woman came to his shop. She could see that the young apothecary was troubled. She asked him what was wrong, but he didn't know how to tell her what he had learned. He looked into her eyes, and for a moment, he remembered all the reasons he had fallen in love with her. But then he thought about the people who had died, and he knew he had to make a choice. The apothecary knew that if he wanted to save himself, he would have to betray the woman. He would have to tell the investigator and the old apothecary everything he knew. But if he did that, she would be caught and probably killed for what she had done. The thought of losing her was too painful to bear. But if he stayed loyal to her, he knew he would be risking his own life. The investigator and the old apothecary would not stop until they found the truth, and they would see him as an accomplice. He could be punished too, or even worse. Finally, the apothecary made his decision. He couldn't let the woman be caught. He decided to help her escape the town. He prepared a special potion that would make her disappear without a trace, but there was a catch. He knew that if he helped her, he would have to stay behind and face the consequences alone. The night before they were supposed to leave, the apothecary gave the woman the potion. He told her to go far away where no one could find her. She looked at him with tears in her eyes, and she knew what he was sacrificing for her. She drank the potion and quietly left the town. The next morning, when the investigator and the old apothecary came to the shop, they found the young apothecary waiting for them. He told them that the woman was gone, but he refused to say where. He knew that by helping her escape, he had sealed his own fate. The young apothecary sat alone in his shop, waiting. The investigator and the old apothecary had asked him many questions, but he stayed silent. He didn't tell them where the woman had gone. He knew they were angry, but he didn't care. He had made his choice. Days passed, and the town was quiet again. The strange deaths stopped, and people began to feel safe. But the young apothecary was not free. The investigator and the old apothecary were still watching him. They wanted to find the woman, but they couldn't. She had vanished, just as the young apothecary had planned. The apothecary's shop was empty now. People didn't come as often as they used to. Some were afraid of him, thinking he was involved in the deaths. Others just didn't trust him anymore. He felt lonely, but he knew he had done what he had to do. One night, the apothecary heard a noise outside his shop. He opened the door, but no one was there. On the ground, he found a small, familiar vial, the kind he used to make potions. It was empty, but it had a note inside. The note was simple, just one word: remember. The apothecary didn't know what the note meant or who had left it. Was it a message from the woman? Was she still out there, somewhere? Or was it a warning from someone else, telling him that his troubles were not over? The apothecary, a man with eyes that had seen too much, stood in the doorway of his dimly lit shop. A cold wind whipped through the narrow streets of the ancient city, carrying with it the mournful cries of distant seagulls. He watched the night unfold, his gaze fixed on the moon that hung low in the sky, casting eerie shadows across the cobbled alleyways. A shiver ran down his spine as he thought of the woman who had just left, her eyes filled with a haunting intensity. had seemed to pierce his soul. He knew that he would never forget her, nor the terrifying secrets she had revealed. The encounter had been a catalyst, stirring up dormant memories of a past he had tried so desperately to bury. Was he truly free, or was he still trapped in a game of fate that he could never win? The apothecary wondered if the woman had been a harbinger, a warning of darker forces at work, or perhaps she was simply a pawn in a much larger, more sinister game. The thought sent a chill down his spine, and he pulled his cloak tighter around himself. As he turned back into his shop, he knew that the night was far from over. The past was coming back to haunt him, and he was powerless to stop it. And so the apothecary was left with a question that would haunt him forever. Had he really saved the woman, or had he just doomed himself?